in the high exclusive ballrooms of Boston and New York, where you need centuries of heritage just to belong. True power has a name that demands immediate deference, unlimited credit, and collective trust without a single piece of paper. Rockefeller. For 30 years, American high society had been hypnotized by a flawless presence. He negotiates million-dollar deals with a simple nod of his head, advises institutions on rare art, and speaks with an aristocratic accent that sounds like privilege itself. Yet, this majestic figure possesses no valid driver's license, no verified background, and zero genetic connection to the bloodline he claims to own. He had no social security number to keep him up, no credit cards, no valid passport, and no paper trail connecting him to the financial system. Yet, for nearly 3 decades, his mere name was a golden key that unlocked every vault of trust. He called himself Clark Rockefeller, a reclusive prince of America's wealthiest and most secretive dynasty. He is the single greatest lie American history has ever actively accepted. But behind this magnificent veneer of high society royalty lay a chilling psychological anomaly. Clark Rockefeller did not exist. He was a phantom, an exquisite lie constructed out of thin air. The man inside the tailored suits was actually an illegal, penniless German immigrant who arrived in America with nothing but a suitcase, and a terrifyingly brilliant understanding of the human blind spot. This is the ultimate anatomy of absolute identity reconstruction, an exploration of how a single individual completely erased his past to live a legendary lie. This is not just identity theft. It is absolute psychological warfare. How did an outsider successfully murder his own identity to live as American royalty? And what happened when his 30-year illusion finally collided with a brutal reality? To understand the birth of this master deceiver, we must witness the precise moment a boy became a king in his own mind, and look at the exact moment a small-town teenager decided to obliterate his true self. To witness that precise moment of psychological murder, we must leave the glittering ballrooms of New York and travel back to a world that Clark Rockefeller spent his entire life trying to destroy. The story does not begin in a historic American estate, but in the small, quiet village of Bergen, tucked deep inside the mountains of Bavaria, Germany. In the late 1970s, this was a place frozen in tradition, where a person's future was strictly dictated by their birth. Here lived a boy named Christian Gerhartsreiter. To his school teachers and neighbours, but Christian was entirely unremarkable. A quiet, pale teenager from a modest working-class family. His father was a public painter, and his mother was a homemaker. There was no wealth, no historical legacy, and no prestige in his bloodline. But inside Christian's mind, a quiet and dangerous rebellion was taking root. He looked at the ordinary tools of his father's trade and the simple life of the village with utter contempt. He became deeply infatuated with American television shows, movie culture, and the glittering myths of Western capitalism. To him, America was not just a geographic location, but a song. It was a grand theatre where the past could be completely rewritten, provided one had the cold courage to shed their own skin. In 1978, at the age of 17, with a temporary tourist visa and a heart full of calculation, Christian walked away from his family, boarded a flight to the United States, and silently vowed that Christian Gerhartsreiter would never return alive. The moment his feet touched American soil, the young immigrant immediately collided with a brutal reality that threatened to crush his grand illusions. He quickly realized that a penniless foreigner with a thick, clumsy German accent would always be viewed as an outsider, trapped at the very bottom of the social hierarchy. To conquer this new world, he realized he could not simply learn a new language. He had to systematically execute his original identity. He transformed himself into a human sponge, spending thousands of hours meticulously studying the behavioral patterns of the American upper class. He observed how wealthy men held their crystal glasses, the precise cadence of their laughter, and the subtle, arrogant way they occupied a room. His first major experiment in identity reconstruction took place in a wealthy neighborhood in Connecticut. By adopting the name Chris Gerhardt and pretending to be an aristocratic foreign exchange student, he successfully convinced a local family to take him in. But as his tourist visa expired, rendering him an illegal alien subject to immediate federal deportation, his psychological strategy shifted from simple lying to total desperate survival. He fled to California, completely abandoning his first alias, and re-emerged in the affluent tech and entertainment sectors as Christopher Crowe, a brilliant 20-something Hollywood television producer. He walked into major entertainment networks and financial brokerages with absolute confidence, speaking with a newly manufactured, highly refined British-American accent that completely buried his Bavarian roots. Christian taught himself the complex jargon of Wall Street and Hollywood simply by reading trade magazines and memorizing key phrases. He was so psychologically convincing that he actually secured high-paying positions at prestigious investment firms like Nikko Securities, managing large financial portfolios for wealthy clients who never once asked to see his paperwork, too. Through these early successes, the young German had discovered a profound vulnerability in human nature. People rarely check the credentials, but that's of someone who already acts like they belong at the top. But just as he was settling into this lucrative California lifestyle, his past began to catch up with him. Federal regulators started investigating his financial licenses, and local authorities began asking questions about his lack of official documentation. Christian realized his current persona was burning out, and the walls were closing in. To survive the next chapter of his hunt, he needed a masterstroke. He needed a new identity, one so powerful, so majestic, and so historically untouchable that no low-level investigator would ever dare to question his right to exist. Driven by this desperate need for absolute immunity, the man who had been Christopher Crowe fled the tightening noose in California and completely vanished. When he re-emerged on the east coast of America in the early 1990s, he was no longer a minor player in the deception game. He arrived with his most daring and magnificent creation yet, introducing himself to the hyper-exclusive social clubs of New York and Boston as Clark Rockefeller. By claiming to be a reclusive, eccentric heir to the legendary Rockefeller dynasty, the family that had literally funded the industrial empire of modern America, he instantly bypassed the standard procedures of human vetting to prevent anyone from cross-referencing his claims with the actual living members of the prominent New York family. Christian implemented a masterstroke of reverse psychology. He casually informed his new acquaintances that he belonged to a forgotten European branch of the dynasty, one that had long since severed all diplomatic and financial ties with the mainstream billionaires. He did not present himself as a man searching for wealth. Instead, he acted like a man deeply burdened by his own historical lineage. He spoke of his vast family trusts with a tone of profound aristocratic boredom. He wore intentionally faded old money clothing, carried himself with an erratic eccentricity, and strictly refused to allow his photograph to be taken, claiming an intense lifelong paranoia about international kidnapping syndicates targeting his bloodline. This carefully calculated performance brilliantly weaponized a specific social vulnerability: status anxiety. In the rigid world of old money high society, questioning a man named Rockefeller about his identity is considered the ultimate unforgivable breach of etiquette. It is a social insult so catastrophic that it could permanently destroy the reputation of the person asking the question. Therefore, the wealthy elites of Boston chose to collectively assume he was genuine, simply to protect their own social comfort and avoid a potential disaster. When Clark Rockefeller walked into the exclusive Algonquin Club, the oldest and most prestigious private institution in Boston, the board members welcomed him with absolute deference, without ever demanding a single piece of government identification. His presence alone brought an aura of historical majesty to their rooms, and because other powerful individuals accepted him, the psychological phenomenon of social proof became absolute. He became a permanent fixture at elite dinner parties, advised prominent museums on art curation, and debated philosophy with Ivy League professors. None of these highly educated, brilliant individuals ever noticed that this billionaire Rockefeller never used a credit card, always insisted on paying with cash provided by others, and never once signed his legal name on a binding contract. His manufactured charisma had created a total cognitive dissonance. The elite world desperately wanted the myth of the eccentric Rockefeller to be true, so they actively blinded themselves to every warning sign. But a persona cannot fund a Wungzhou lifestyle forever on charm alone. To solidify his empire of illusion, Clark Rockefeller needed a permanent wealthy benefactor, a brilliant target who would provide the ultimate validation for his fake identity. The search for that ultimate benefactor ended in 1995, when Clark Rockefeller encountered a woman named Sandra Boss. Sandra was the perfect target, and the ultimate validation of his grand illusion. She was a brilliant corporate star, a graduate of Harvard Business School, and a high-ranking partner at the prestigious consulting firm McKinsey & Company, earning a salary of over $1 million a year. She was a woman rigorously trained in analytical thinking, data investigation, and corporate due diligence. Yet, the moment she stepped into the psychological matrix of Clark Rockefeller, her critical thinking completely evaporated. Clark manipulated her mind by deploying a highly calculated technique known in forensic psychology as isolation control. He systematically convinced her that, because of his extreme family wealth and the dangerous hidden political enemies of the Rockefeller dynasty, they had to live a highly guarded off-the-grid existence. He flatly refused to allow their marriage to be legally registered with the government, claiming it was a necessary security measure to protect her and his family trusts from international tax authorities and ruthless kidnapping cartels. For 12 long years, this highly educated, ultra-successful corporate executive lived in a state of absolute psychological captivity inside her own home. Sandra became the sole financial engine of their entire household, providing millions of dollars to fund their luxurious lifestyle, purchasing a historic mansion in New Hampshire, and buying rare works of art. Clark spent her money lavishly while maintaining absolute psychological dominance, constantly reminding her that her corporate wealth was nothing more than pocket change, if compared to the ancient imperial power attached to his family name. He controlled every micro aspect of their domestic environment. He monitored her phone calls, restricted her access to external friends, and strictly forbade her from asking any logical questions about his financial assets or legal documentation. Sandra Boss had been slowly drawn into a private two-person cult, where Clark Rockefeller was the undisputed infallible deity. Whenever she raised even a minor doubt about his strange rules, he would instantly weaponize emotional abuse, projecting a cold, terrifying fury and threatening to cut her off from the legendary Rockefeller legacy forever. Blinded by devotion and deeply dependent on the immense social prestige that came with her husband's mythical name, she chose to suppress her own towering intellect, unknowingly becoming the ultimate enabler of a dangerous fraud. But even the most flawless psychological prison cannot permanently withstand the friction of time and reality. By 2006, the suffocating internal pressure inside this golden cage became too immense for Sandra Boss to bear. Exhausted by the perpetual emotional micromanagement, the calculated isolation, and the increasingly bizarre domestic ultimatums, the brilliant executive finally forced herself to look past the family myth. She began to notice dangerous financial patterns that no wealth could justify. Her husband flatly refused to sign joint tax returns, forcing them to file completely separately, a massive, illogical anomaly for a multi-million-dollar household. When Sandra finally gathered the psychological strength to demand a divorce, Clark's calculated charisma instantly dissolved into frantic absolute paranoia in the bitter high-stakes custody battle that followed over their young daughter, Ray. The family court ordered a routine, comprehensive background check on the mysterious billionaire, sensing that his 30-year illusion was about to violently collide with a federal database. The architect of lies scrambled to minimize the damage, quickly agreeing to a low divorce settlement of $800,000 in exchange for surrendering primary custody of his daughter. This absolute loss of control broke something fundamental inside the imposter's calculating mind. In July 2008, during a court-sanctioned supervised parental visit in the streets of Boston, the master manipulator executed a desperate military-style kidnapping. He brutally shoved the supervising social worker to the ground, forced his 7-year-old daughter into a waiting black SUV, and sped into the traffic, launching a massive federal manhunt that gripped the entire nation. The FBI unleashed its full counterterrorism and investigative machinery, placing his elegant face on every television screen and highway billboard across America. But as federal agents scanned the national networks for his social security numbers, banking records, and biometric history, they made a chilling discovery. The high society icon possessed absolutely zero digital footprint. He was an invisible entity in the machine. It took 6 days of intense intelligence tracking for the FBI to locate him at a marina in Baltimore, Maryland, where he had already purchased a luxury yacht under yet another false alias, preparing to flee to South America. As the SWAT team surrounded his position and forced his absolute surrender, they pressed his fingers onto a mobile biometric scanner. Within seconds, the federal computer chip processed the ridges of his skin, shattering a 30-year-old illusion in a flash of light. The man who had charmed the American aristocracy was formally identified as Christian Gerhartsreiter, an illegal immigrant wanted by the government for decades. Yet, as the handcuffs clicked into place, the FBI realized that the unraveling of his past was just beginning, and the true horror of his history was about to surface. As the international media celebrated the capture of the ultimate white-collar imposter, the grand narrative took a dark, terrifying turn. The stripping away of Christian's final mask reopened cold files that had remained frozen in the archives of California law enforcement for over 2 decades. In 1985, during his residency in the affluent neighborhood of San Marino, under the false identity of Christopher Chichester, a young newlywed couple named Jonathan and Linda Sohus suddenly vanished without a trace. This enigmatic aristocratic newcomer had been renting a guest house directly on their property. Shortly after the couple disappeared, the mysterious tenant vanished from the West Coast, and a few months later, he was spotted on the opposite side of the country driving Jonathan Sohus's luxury vehicle. In 1994, the ground gave up its secrets. Workers excavating the backyard of that San Marino property uncovered 3 plastic bags containing the dismembered skeletal remains of a human male. The skull bore the brutal, unmistakable marks of blunt force trauma. Forensic scientists formally identified the remains as Jonathan Sohus. For 20 years, the true name of the suspicious tenant remained an unsolved riddle, preventing the homicide investigation from ever moving forward. But now, with the biometric validation linking the German fugitive to every single one of his historical personas, the puzzle pieces fell into place with devastating and undeniable precision. In 2011, while already serving a prison sentence for the high-profile kidnapping of his daughter, Christian Gerhartsreiter was formally indicted for first-degree murder. The subsequent trial in Los Angeles was a chilling masterclass in psychological defense. The defendant sat at the table looking perfectly calm, detached, and thoroughly intellectual, occasionally offering polite smiles to the prosecution team. His defense attorneys attempted to paint him as a tragic victim of a fractured mind, a man suffering from severe dissociative identity disorder who genuinely believed his own manufactured legacy and possessed zero memory of any violence. But the prosecutors systematically dismantled the performance. They presented a mountain of circumstantial evidence, including the vintage postcards Christian had personally sent from the East Coast, using the dead man's identity. The jury looked past the highly refined exterior and saw the calculating predator beneath. In April 2013, Christian Gerhartsreiter was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 26 years to life in state prison. The man who had spent 3 decades rewriting reality was finally bound by the concrete walls of a maximum security cell. The ultimate downfall of Christian Gerhartsreiter leaves our modern society with a profound, deeply unsettling diagnostic lesson. His long empire of lies succeeded not because he possessed high-tech equipment, but because he understood that human beings are deeply social creatures, ruled by perception and status. He looked at an elite class that was thoroughly infatuated with prestige, thoroughly blinded by corporate titles and historical lineages, and he constructed a flawless mirror that gave them exactly what they craved to see. He weaponized our collective politeness, our deep fear of social awkwardness, and our complete deference to institutional privilege. He proved that if you carry yourself with absolute aristocratic authority, the world will actively build the narrative around you, creating reasons to protect your credibility simply to protect their own fragile comfort. The story of this fabricated Rockefeller is a stark, timeless warning that the greatest vulnerabilities in our hyper-connected world are not digital loopholes or security flaws, but the permanent weaknesses inside human psychology. The actual masks of this master manipulator have been permanently stripped away, his real identity locked inside a secure cell, leaving behind a haunting monument to the terrifying power of absolute self-reinvention. The question is, would you be sharp enough to look past the tailored veneer if a charming stranger entered your circle with a legendary name? Or would you too fall victim to the next great illusion? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to follow our journey into the darkest corners of human manipulation, because the next hidden file is already waiting to be uncovered.